A little about the chat before Fateh takes over. So, this fireside chat will largely examine design's evolving role. Again, keeping to the theme of the day, which is design beyond aesthetics. It will look at how design is a cultural, social, and environmental force, literally, the kind of impact that it brings. By redefining aesthetics, designers are addressing human, ecological, and experiential needs. And this is what these two women, great work with through their work, are trying to do and achieve. They're trying to create thoughtful solutions, and that is what Fateh is going to take forward and talk. Over to you guys.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first day of Raw Collaborative. Welcome, Naomi, Priyamvada. We are so happy to have you all here. This year, we've actually expanded beyond the formats that we had, showcase formats at Raw Collaborative, and we introduced the pavilion spaces, which were meant so that we could collaborate, bring together architects and designers to actually work with product designers, furniture designers, and develop spatial experiences that also push how we showcase, in the Indian design context. So Naomi was the guest designer and curator for the Sustainable Living Pavilion, which showcases 8 practicing studios from India. And Priyamvada has been the guest curator for the Design Futures Pavilion, where again we have 8 practices exhibiting different parameters of design practices in India. Uh, I will start off this chat with first wanting to know from you what would you say is the how would you define aesthetics in design?
Um, okay, so I think aesthetics is something which is very contextual, right? So it's not like when we say design beyond aesthetics, when I heard that, right? Like I think aesthetic itself is beyond a simple definition. So it's culturally contextual, it's contextual to the kind of program that you're building for, it's contextual to the environment, etc., right? For instance, even proportions we were talking earlier, proportions, what we find aesthetic in India would be very different to what you would find aesthetic in Europe, and that could be because of, how we are built versus how they are built. Anthropometrics is different. So I think like aesthetics, thinking somehow in the Instagram world, aesthetics has become more about the money shot or about that one particular image, and because of a global kind of exposure, we've started defining aesthetics more globally, which I find a little bit problematic, because it can still be contemporary and yet be extremely rooted. So to me, aesthetics is something that you take from the past and bring into the future rather than define it as something solid. Yeah.
Yeah, I think her take was what we were actually talking about. But beyond that, we still talk very casual. Oh, this looks nice, but this looks nice is like it's not devoid of where it looks nice, in what context it looks nice, and for this appropriateness of the space, what happens here. So it's never in isolation with where you're placed. So I think, yeah, the contextual, and it's not just the physical state, but who you're working with, who's going to actually do the work, how's everything together coming in, and their sensibilities coming into place, and not just what you are imagining, but everything coming play with who's working on it, who are you defining it for. Everything together sort of will define that aesthetics for a particular thing per se. So, yeah.
Okay, so then when we want to talk about what goes beyond the aesthetics in design, what do you think are the key parameters or the key pointers?
I mean, there could be a gazillion pointers and parameters, but I think like for us, if I'm to talk about our practice, it is extremely, it's a very conscious decision to first and foremost understand the user. So beyond just knowing that if you're doing an office building, so it's an office building, it needs workstations, it needs that. No, that is something which has to be done, right? But who are your users? Who is this office for? For instance, we are doing a project for the NGO called Pradhan. They're like a 40-year-old NGO that works with grassroots organizations. They're touted to be the people who started the whole SHG, self-help group, motion in India. So before we even started this, we're building their office building in Noida. So before we even started that, I insisted that I would like to go to their campus, which is in a rural area in Kesla. in Madhya Pradesh, and that's where it all started, right? Like that one first kutia that they had on this big campus was where it all started, and it was very interesting to see that unlike most of the other commercial organizations that we work with, where people change in, let's say, 2 years, 3 years. Here, everybody I met had worked there, from the day that they had joined. So the youngest person working was 10 years of being in that company, right? So when you're designing for somebody like that, it's a very different aesthetic, or it's a very different kind of a building that you're doing for them, and it's a very different kind of even furniture that you're building for them, right? Like the way that they work is extremely different. Now, their campus had queues already. So, there were things like how they did their meetings. So there were these open, round, just platforms like chabutras, and those were their meeting spaces. So we're bringing that into a building in Noida, right? And how we're doing it, that's the job of the architect or the designer. But it's to understand कि वो सार क्या है, of that
Principle.
user. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure now. But yeah, so design, I mean, we keep coining these terms at the office, like people, place, and matter is what we sort of, I think that sums it up to the same thing. But I mean, people, not just people who you're building for, people who, I mean, because our practice is a little more process oriented in terms of also construction and how we are dealing with things. So people who are not just like at who you're building for, but people who you're building with. And also, I mean, I think for me, it's also like how we are placed and in the office who we are working with, and what that sensibilities get to the place. So everybody's collective sensibilities become that part of it. And when I'm saying place, it's like a physical place, but what that place sort of brings together, not just as aesthetic, but it's crude terms of what problems that come with it, and how are you going to do things, and how are you going to cater to those. So those are intangibles that you don't see, but they are a big reflection, like later in the, like when you draw a line, okay, this is how it's going to be done, and it's not going to be possible in this place and matter, and then that's how it's guided to. And when I say matter, again, matter is beyond the material. I mean, I think so somewhere we are coined like we're doing sustainability, but I think it's beyond the material that it, at the end, material is a very big visual for sure, but it's beyond that. The appropriateness of that space and that material in that current context is what sort of would add to that, and that together sort of defines that beyond the aesthetics part of it.
I guess it's the emotion, right,
Yeah.
that you evoke. There is an emotion in every space. There's an emotion in this space. Right? Churches are built a certain way to evoke a certain emotion in you. So I think it all boils down to how are you bringing material together to create the kind of emotions or feelings or sense that you want people to,
The association of this, the association with it, and the memory with it also.
So that actually brings me to my
Next question.
next question, the emotional impact. So the emotional impact of design, the emotional impact of the context in which the design has happened, because for every action, for every decision, there are, it follows a certain path and then it shapes a certain way. So when you talk about emotional aspects of design, could you dwell a little more into that?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like you said, yeah, the emotional aspect of things, like, yeah, design is functional, but I think it's beyond just that. I would say that a memory with a building, an association with building is as functional as anything else. So that's the emotion content of the building. So I mean, we always say this thing when we're like, where's the place for nothingness in the building? Like, where's the place to pause? Like, where's the place to, I want to go have a cup of chai? Like, where do I actually, you're not building spaces just to sort of have functions around it, but the association with it, you can recreate a space, but it's again very, very contextualized to where you're in the contemporary part of things. But the little association and memory really adds to a space. So that, yeah, that layer of emotion and what you're interacting with, the user is interacting with the space is the key intent, because at the end you want the client to be happy and content with whatever space and whatever function you're dealing with. So
Okay, I have a slightly different question
Sorry,
than the one that you prepared for, but I do want to ask it that we had a very strong sense of a cultural and a social narrative that design followed in the yesteryears, right?
yeah.
If you were to evaluate design that is happening today, what would be your comment that what sort of a social or cultural narrative is it giving out?
Okay, so actually I was going to talk a little bit about that. So I think that if we are to look at, first let's look at, how we built in the past, right? We built extremely inclusive.
Yeah.
We built inclusive not only for community, we built inclusive for various programs. So every private building had some amount of public to it, right? Our house had a stoop, which was part of, it's my stoop, I own it, but it was a public function, a street function. Anybody can go sit there, you chit chat, and there was this very interesting boundary and negotiation between the public, semi-public, and then private, right? Semi-private and then private, actually, if you look at it. It was a gradient, yeah? So that is one. Second, inclusive not only for humans, but I would argue even for the environment around us. So some simple things like the kolam or the this thing that we make in front of the house, it's made with atta, right? And that is ants come and eat it. In UP you see this, at least. My father is from Eastern UP, and we have a house in a village, so it has those terracotta tiles, and the eaves, the way that those are built, they actually serve as a spot for birds to perch, and when it rains they become bird water perches, right? There was a spot in the house where a snake would come during Nag Panchami. My daddy used to actually keep a bowl of milk and tell us, "Aaj wahan mat jana because saap aayenge." So no, we were not told to kill a snake or anything. You lived with the environment, right? The inclusivity that we built for, I think we are not building for anymore.
Yeah, I think
And that is something.
Frampton's multi-species mutualism.
Yeah, no,
I
that
think we
his
should-
is yeah.
Could you
No,
talk
his
about
is
that?
critical regionalism, but yes. So I mean, the whole idea being that post Anthropocene, right? Like that's where we are right now, and it's more about multi-species and thinking about the human not at the center of it, but the human as being part of a larger environment, right? So the other species are as important as the human species, and then you build sensitively. And my argument is that we did that in the past. We were very, very cognizant of the environment. And again, if I go back to the village house, there is a pond in front of it, there is a little bagan, then there is a matika, stoop, then there's a courtyard, and there are places for all kinds of animals that live in this environment to be sort of live with us, right? So that, I think, is something that at least we as a practice strive towards. How much we achieve is something depends.
Yeah, but you still skipped the question.
What is the question, sir?
That what were you
For
looking?
what we
yeah.
are looking at, I find it quite banal, to be honest, mostly.
But it also talks about a certain cultural narrative.
Because we
right?
don't have
Yes.
a context to respond to at the moment. So,
No,
like,
would it be
yeah.
that? Maybe I think it is that. Sorry, I cut you
no.
short.
I mean, I'm saying I've lived here, brought up here. So I don't have a cultural association. My parents were brought like around. So I don't have stories to think about. I don't have associations to think about. So in an environment where I have not seen and I go to the south of India and things, I see still some roots of things happening around, but I don't see it around me. So even if I have to recreate that association, it's a forced association that I would think about recreating, because probably it's not contextual for me anymore. Like right now it'll be like, okay, how do people spend time now? And not to say that's correct or wrong, but this is how it is. So I don't know. I mean, for me it's lacking, I wouldn't know what to respond to if I'm putting in a city context and putting in a context here and now. So I probably wouldn't know how to sort of appropriate that to the context now. So
she's given us one word for it, banal.
banal.
What would you give?
Wow, I'll be gibberish here. I don't know. I mean, yeah, gibberish, yeah. Gibberish, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
So moving on, this year while you were working on the Sustainability Pavilion, and we had several conversations about narratives. And every time we were trying to address a different aspect, trying to look at a different, direction. So how sustainability is being addressed. Do you think it's becoming monodirectional, or is too much importance given to one aspect? Say materiality is one aspect,
Yeah.
given too much importance,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
other things are just in the background. So what do you think are the important aspects in sustainability, and the various, like, list out a few and the ones that you think are absolutely not addressed?
Yeah, I mean, when we are, I mean, again, how you said materiality is seen larger because it's the only visual thing that you have, and not everybody is going to read between the lines of why that visual has come out the way it has come out. And I mean, I face it a lot because we've always been termed like, oh, we are doing some sustainable architecture, and I would actually think that no, probably not. We are just figuring out what we are doing for the context that time. So, and like we were discussing, we would not call it sustainable. We'd probably look at it more ecologically. Like, I think ecology would be a better term to it, and like not just like physical ecology, like human ecology, and how you're basically repurposing, reliving things, and how you're responding to the context now. And I mean, a material is not probably defining in that material, even if it's a raw looking at a crude material, it might not live. I mean, I might not like it tomorrow, so it's not sustainable because I'm not going to use it tomorrow. So yeah, so that ways, I mean, even if like a basic concrete or a steel building is definitely, if it's going to serve the purpose of a space, it is definitely doing that. So material, I think that material part of it, I think if it's a devoid for a product, I understand where the processes are coming from and what you're using as a raw material, but just defining a built environment, that ways I would think, yeah, differently for that.
So my take on this would be that to take on the ecology part, right, like ecological design. I think that what is happening is that, and again, I'm going to be very contentious here, but the focus is on, if you've done mud plaster, it's sustainable. If you have, like chaja, what's it called?
Thatched roof.
Thatched
Pitch
roof,
roof, yeah.
it's sustainable. Yes, these things are sustainable, but are they being built sustainably?
Yeah.
That is number one, right? I think to truly be ecological or sustainable, we have to look at processes. There's a lot of data-driven design out there. We
Yeah.
have tech now that is giving us, a lot of information on how buildings can be built more sustainable. Just simple passive design. I think we've forgotten that as architects. We want to, like, your simple sun diagram and wind diagram. You started with that, yeah. People don't even put north sun, yeah.
No, I was just going to ask a question at this point because sustainable goals. Then the question that always comes is that what is sustainable?
Exactly.
That's a
Exactly.
big question mark, because is it just a cash crop word?
Exactly.
That is used when you attach or you
Exactly.
prefix or suffix, or does it really have any meaning in it?
Exactly. Yeah,
Because
so
I really like ecological word.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to expand a little.
yeah, no, so that is exactly why I said that it would be a little contentious, because I feel right now we just put sustainable on everything and we, celebrate it. And it's mostly for the materiality, and not even the materiality really, like
Visual
if you are
mat-
getting visual materiality.
Yeah,
there you
sorry.
go, yeah. So like if people are working with a material scientist, like, lot of practices,
yeah.
larger practices abroad, of course, are doing a lot more of that. Or even if not a material scientist, but with a karigar, and you're genuinely getting, that. So for example, again, I go back to the village. I have, gone every year of my life, so there's a lot of life experience there. But there is a grass hut that is made in the farms, in the fields, which is called madhai, right? And there are 3 different types of grasses that grow on the delta. So one grass is structural, one grass is for the cladding, and one grass is for time, right? So there are 3 different types of grasses. This madhai, by the way, in UP, Eastern UP, where it rains extensively during monsoon, lasts for 10 years, minimum. Right, if done properly, but it's the skill of putting it together.
Yeah.
So we're losing. Now I take the same grass and I plaster it onto something and I say,
Yeah.
"Maine madhai bana diya, I am sustainable." No, you're not. Is it standing for that 10 years?
Yeah.
And is it standing for that 10 years and giving me shelter in rain? Reducing the temperature, I kid you not, by minimum 10 degrees centigrade. Like, it is so comfortable to be in that space, and that's why they're built in the fields, because that's where the farmer goes and rests and the animals rest, etc. Right? So if we are, I think it's very important to get into the process of
Yeah.
the material and also really leverage tech. I think we are leveraging tech in a, again, very visual manner.
Yeah.
Like especially kids these days. Script. My script will do this. No, the script will do what you
Ask
want
it
it,
to, yeah.
to do.
Ask
You
it
need
to.
to know what you want to do first, right? Like, where is you? Where is your mind as the designer or the architect? And then, yes, use tech and leverage tech and whatever. But yeah.
I think I want to just add like a small story from what you're saying. That we were doing like a glamping refuge kind of a project where the client wanted a visually sustainable looking building, and bamboo was something that we really want to work with. And we were like, okay, let's do it. But I think the people, Shubhata and his team, who actually helped us put the pavilion here also, the way they came to the site, like material, forget it, like what the material was doing, because bamboo was their life skill, like how they knew, because they were not people who are building in bamboo, they were people who are using bamboo as a life skills available. I can add money and build my own house, like I have a little more money, I'll add a floor on top of it, so they know what the material is extensively doing. So the way I didn't have any intent on how I was using that material. I knew like, ye itna chahiye, ye ho jayega, whatever. But the way they were using it, the way they set up the whole space, I didn't have to give them anything. The way they naturally set up the space of their processes that would come in the building, it was great to see it. It was great to transform the site into a space that they actually sort of like became their house at that point. And like whatever bamboo came out of the structural bamboo, the wastage went into a wattle and daub wall, which I didn't think of. I would probably go and source that part of it, but they knew that these threads will be used in this. Whatever came out of that became, where they flattened that up and made in the roof. To begin with it, I didn't know any of this, and that had to come from them and not me. So I think what the material as a process did was more important than the material itself, because they knew what they were doing. And probably, if I did, it was going to be forced if I had to do it myself. So yeah, it was just to add to the processes part of things.
So being in India, for us, hand skills, artisan skills are very, very important. And we are in a time where everything is becoming digital. So something I've learned from her, haptic digital futures, is something which, I feel is really what we need to dwell into. So if you were to take that concept, or if you were to talk about that concept as a haptic digital future, how do you think and where do you think it comes up, and how would you define it for the context today?
So I'll again give an example. Like one of our early projects, it's a lab in IIT Delhi, small, not a large project. Budgets were ridiculously minimal. We obviously designed this really funky thing in Rhino, and we were like, I'm coming from the States, and I'm like, yeah, CNC milling. And then we go try to get budgets, and you don't have the money. Now, what are you going to do? Number one is that. Number two, nothing here in interiors, all the interior designers will appreciate, is built precisely, right? So even if I cut something precisely, if I'm trying to fit it into the space, there's going to be hajar problems of fixing, fir beech mein baithao, fir ye karo. So what we did was, we produced the drawings that we would produce to cut it digitally, but then we actually printed them 1:1 scale, made it on site, numbered it, explained it to the carpenter, and the carpenters are phenomenally skilled, right? Like, and they're intelligent beyond belief. They built that entire thing in lesser than it would have taken us to actually go CNC mill it, get it back. The money was lesser, etc. Right? And what came out was such a beautiful piece, because it was actually a screen, and like multiple cut screens. It looked exactly like what we had designed, and it yet had that hand ka. Somebody was talking about that in the morning panel, that in the clay, that when you start to touch it, you realize the importance of the hand. So the hand finish on a digital design, I think it was just really, really nice. So we started to leverage that. Like, we did that for multiple projects, where the budgets are, and that's, I think, everybody's problem in India, that no matter how big your client is, yeah, exactly. So, no, but everywhere else, you kind of have fixed budgets, no? And
Still, it's always
yeah, I guess, yeah. But anyway, so we kind of, I think that was one of the first times that I saw the power of how you can be distinct and yet use technology to speed things up, right? And you're sort of giving craft a bit of a life.
so you're not rejecting that
Exactly,
or resenting it.
exactly,
You're accepting it.
exactly, exactly, yeah.
So interesting that we have here an example of you trying to create a digital design using hand skills,
Yeah.
and there are people who are right now experimenting and researching so that they can train machines to create outputs which give that
Human,
hand
Yeah,
human
yeah,
feel to
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so thinking forward on these lines, interdisciplinary collaborations, how do you think they enrich these processes? And do you think these interdisciplinary collaborations are just for professional disciplines, or they also dwell down the craft clusters and people who actually, are making things with their hands?
Um, Yeah, sorry. For collaborative practices, yeah, I mean, definitely it has to be the way forward is interdisciplinary. I mean, you cannot be good at everything, and you will have to leverage skills that you don't possess, and you can actually add on to somebody else's skill. I know we are still like I think more to do with Gujarati. We want to sort of do everything by ourselves, do everything. Hun badhu pothe kari laish is the attitude to everything, but I think that slowly really has to go, and people are doing it wonderfully. Whatever people are doing with crafts and craftsmen, and like as design studios interdisciplinary by themselves also, like by the practice within people also, if that sort of approach is taken, everybody is going to be at a much, like we are working towards a collective, like better aesthetics, better functionality. So I think it's a collective goal, so probably people can really join hands to sort of deal with the same things. And yeah, and it's beyond the you that we always claim to be, but it's the you. So yeah.
Okay, so again, I think like couple of things, interdisciplinary within the practice, yes, but also collaborating with clients, collaborating
yeah.
with, for instance, we are working with governments as well, and this is not like projects that come to you. You find the need, you kind of, leverage your way, find a connection and say, hey, so you're doing Anganwadis, how can we help you make this better, right? So there's a lot of that sort of, I think, collaboration also, where you learn so much. Because again, another thing that, speaking of the Anganwadi, like one realizes that when you're sitting in your own office and thinking this up, you're thinking from the mind of an architect or a designer who has a certain set and certain caliber, yeah? But then you go into the community, you actually sit down and listen to people and listen to government officials, the PWD engineers who are going to build these facilities. That's where the collaborative process actually gets enriched. And what comes out
Feedback
is a true collaboration,
Yeah.
right? There was another example where, and this will even talk to the ecological design or waste, etc., sustainability that we talk of. So a young, startup, they decided that they're going to use containers, what are they called? Retired containers that will go to waste as to refurbish them and use them for classrooms. So the typical way is कि आपने container लिया and you fix it inside and you transport it around, right? But the problem with that is that in a country like India, where you have extreme climate, either it is too hot or it is too cold, and you need air conditioning. The metal box is the worst thing to put out where there is no infrastructure to hide it, right? So what we did was we joined forces with these guys and we said, okay, fine, we'll design this container for you. So very simple, we took the walls, we opened it up, that became like the actual square footage, and then we had panels that packed the thing together, and you had a precise classroom that could be flat packed like an IKEA, and that can be moved around. So we did one prototype, it actually happened, but didn't go to scale, right? So thinking, I mean, here you are using a retired shipping container, but then again, where does this, remain sustainable? Only up to 2 stories, you don't have to refurbish it, not put enough steel in a container to take the load. Beyond that, itna steel daloge that it actually will become more expensive, right? So there is that, you have to understand what you're using and not, so a lot of times we say we're building container cities. You can't do that. There is structure that has to go in, so it's not sustainable anymore. It's aesthetic, yes, there's a certain aesthetic that you're going for, right? So things like that, I think, is where, contextual. And then what happens is that the skin can be contextualized. Right? It can be made, those panels can be made differently for Kashmir, differently for UP, differently for Ahmedabad, right? And it can have various aspects to it.
So, coming to almost the end of this conversation, both of you are architects, both of you are founders of a company. I'm sure that there are 100 parallel processes that you have to be involved with to keep things in check. While the question initially was that what is the evolving role of design, I really want to know what are your thoughts on what are the evolving roles of a designer. You're expected to be an entrepreneur, you're expected to be a laborer, you're expected to be a therapist at times. Even a model.
Now even that,
Yeah, so
put yourself
I would like to know that what do you define as the actual role of a designer, and then all the things that you actually end up doing.
Oh geez, that's a very difficult. Why don't you go?
I've just come back from an entrepreneurship program from IIM. So I haven't revelation of that kind there, but not that I can actually imply that.
Ready to put yourself out.
Not really. I think I should, like, yeah, it was a realization that I don't. But yeah, so I think, yeah, it's a struggle for sure. And I really don't, I would not say I know the answer for what you're asking. And I want to, what I'm doing is not correct, is what I know at this moment. That what I'm doing is not working. And there has to be a thought to, like, disassociating yourself with a few things, because you can only be good at something and you cannot be good at something else. And if I go on and do that something else, it's not going to make sense. And giving that to somebody else who's actually sort of going to be able to tell me what to do about it also, not just like tell them what has to be done, but yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, it's actually a very tough question, but I think I'm from the generation when, you know, you thought you could do everything yourself. We are terrible at delegating, and I have friends here who are smiling at me, but terrible at delegating. And also you grew up with this, I mean, if you start your own firm, you usually enjoy design, right? You enjoy the conceptualizing, you enjoy the drama behind making things happen. So it's very difficult for me personally. I think that is the toughest part, is to tell myself that, okay, business is important too, and I need to be client facing. I need to delegate this to the younger generation and be acceptable of, you know, what is coming out of it. Yeah, and letting it go. But evolving, what is the role of a designer? I don't know. I think it's very personal, right? Like, it's what for me, what is the role of a designer is building or creating, you know, spaces, for the lack of a better word, that are truly inclusive, right? Like, just and go beyond just functionality. We've been talking about that, but something where I come out enriched at the end of the process. I think that is most important, right? I mean, of course, you do a lot of stuff for money as well. I'm not going to sit here and say, no, you can't run a practice without that. But you have to find those sweet spots and those few things where, you know, the joy remains, because I think the joy is important.
So I would like to close the conversation with a very interesting note that when students or, you know, young enthusiasts who want to get into the design art profession, they're preparing in for their interviews. They prepare so much that, why do you want to be a designer? What do you think a designer does? And, you know, you go prepared and you blabber, and after 20 years and 15 years of practice, you come to a panel and you say, I really don't know. I really can't define that anymore. So
it's an addiction.
It's yeah, I mean, it as and when and more and more you learn, you feel like there's no one definition. The definition changes every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
As and when what the situation comes in. When you're talking about delegation, I'm called the mother-in-law in office. I will not give anything away. Everything has to be done at one point only. But yes, like you said, you have to eventually, you know, start giving out, start accepting that, you know, learning happens, process happens, and that's our panel today for Design Beyond Aesthetics. Thank you all for being there.
Check in with the audience if they want to ask something to.
We had a 1 hour conversation. Baki reh gaya kuch? Please. The floor is yours. She's flying out today evening. So.
Okay. Always an awkward moment. All right. Thank you so much, Priyamvada. Thank you so much, Naomi, for a wonderful conversation, for sharing a lot of your experiences, which we are told about from a completely different perspective, but hearing it from the horse's mouth makes a huge difference. So thanks a lot. Thank you, Fateh, for stepping up and doing this. I'm very excited about that. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We will circle back again at 6 p.m. for an interesting session to understand about Raw Foundry as an initiative, and a small panel, an interesting panel around that. So see you all then.
Thank you.
Thanks.